All right, good morning, folks. Before we get started, just a few notes and housekeeping. This meeting is being recorded and we will be posting it to our website for on-demand viewing once it's available. That usually takes us about 24 hours to process and post. To reduce background noise, all audience members have been brought in on mute and will remain on mute and participate in listen-only mode. If you have a question, please type your questions in the chat panel and we'll get to questions as time allows. If there are any meeting materials, we'll post them with the recording. And if you lose your Zoom connection, just try closing out and reconnecting using the same link. And with that, Dana, I think it's yours.
Thank you, Angie, and good morning, everyone, and welcome to the State Chamber's Legislative Strictly Social Coffee Hour. I want to begin by giving a special shout out, a thank you to our 4 legislative leaders for joining us this morning. I think we all know it's become a busy couple of weeks at the legislature, and to give us your time is truly greatly appreciated. For all of you, let me just spend a moment talking about the program as we see it today. In the next hour to an hour and a half, although we will lose a couple in the time period because of commitments at the legislature, we have given each of the 4 leaders approximately 10 minutes to talk about where we stand today. We're halfway through the session, and so where do you think we stand in that regard in terms of meeting the needs of this session? But also, what is your priority for this session when it comes to a close and you look back on it? And then that will be fun. We'll have a short break, a break insofar as not leaving us, but simply to share a couple of pre-recorded messages from sponsors. Then we jump back in with questions that range from, do you think we will have an in-person opportunity before the session's over? What is your top priority for the budget? The COVID relief package, the $1 billion, what's the priority there? But also, what's your reaction to back to work bond proposal, if there will be one, the items within that? So that's kind of the layout. Again, I certainly want to thank our 4 leaders that make up our panel today. And we're going to begin that in just a moment. But first, a word, as they say on television, from our sponsor. Our premier sponsor is AT&T, and we have 2 at the break, which are Freddie Flaherty as well as Thomas. So here's AT&T.
You're first. First to respond. First to put others' lives before your own. And in an emergency, you need a network that puts you first, that connects you to technology and each other, that's built with and for first responders. FirstNet, the only officially authorized wireless network for first responders. Because putting you first is our job.
To learn more about AT&T and our response to the coronavirus, subscribe to this channel, visit the AT&T newsroom, or watch more videos on the playlist seen here.
Our official sponsors, as you can see, our presenting sponsors, our series sponsors we're very grateful for all the support they give us at this time, especially during the pandemic, but throughout the years as well as our presenting sponsors. So thanks to all of you. I want to jump right into the program first by introducing our distinguished panel. From the Senate, we have the Senate Democrat Majority Leader, Eloise Vitelli, and we also have Matt Pouliot, who is the Senate Republican Assistant Minority Leader. In the House, we have Democrat Michele Dunphy, who is the Majority Leader for the Democrats, and Joe Stetkis for the Republicans Assistant Minority Leader. To all 4 of you, once again, our words of appreciation. We mean that sincerely. So I have been told that because of the session and its pressures of the moment, I will begin with the House. So Representative Michele Dunphy, the floor is yours. Share with us where we stand, but not so much. I mean, you can look at it in terms of what we originally intended, but I think we're all anxious to know your perspective on what was discussed and proposed last evening with a 2-part budget that takes us back to a part 1, essential services, I would assume you adjourn and then come back with a supplemental budget that looks at new spending, new initiatives, with the idea, it seems from what I've read, is to get it out on the street faster, which to me implies to do that in as quick a way possible you'd want a 2/3 budget.
Good morning, and thank you all for inviting me to speak with you this morning. My name is Michele Dunphy. I represent House District 122, which is Old Town and the Indian Island voting district, and I'm glad to be here this morning. So in tackling where we're at and where we're going, we are hard at work with public hearings, work sessions, committee work, and it's been a challenge adapting, but I think we've done a great job given where we're at and that we needed to adapt, and doing that at the same time we were keeping people safe and healthy. So while the learning curve was big for all of us, you know, I think we're doing an amazing job moving our work towards session, hearing bills, and I'm really proud of how we have all adapted given the challenges that we've had. I like the many ways in which we've expanded the access for people to testify, public hearings, you know, by phone, virtual, mail, or online. But you know, it doesn't replace in person. So I'm looking forward to returning as much as anybody else to the in-person learning, and I feel like you know, the vaccination will accelerate that, but I do see for the immediate future our committee work at least being remaining online. So you know, and I also would like to say I'm very proud that we were able to pass a supplemental budget with overwhelming bipartisan support, and I think, you know, that we know the PPP funds were critical for the businesses in our district, in my district of Old Town. It mattered a great deal. I mean, even with some of the PPP funds, we know that some businesses weren't able to keep their doors open. But I know for my chiropractor, a local restaurant, a restaurant that I used to work at in Orono, they kept the doors open, and I feel a lot of pride in that supplemental bipartisan budget. And then with regard to the most recent news, that in looking at the biennial budget, I feel like there is a sincere effort to get a 2/3 vote. We want, as we move forward on accelerating our community, we want predictability, we want stability. And in thinking about, you know, our school funding, the towns and municipalities want to know where we're at. Many of them are putting together their budgets now and working them. And also I'm thinking about the summer tourism industry. As Governor Mills, you know, loosens the restrictions, we want to be able to go forward and have a predictable budget. And so I feel optimistic that that's something that absolutely we can work out in the next week or so. And then in thinking about the priorities for the House or the House Democrats, you know, our number one priority is stabilizing the economy and building the workforce. We know that Maine faces a severe workforce shortage in the upcoming years, and we're focused on legislation that can create pathways to more jobs in specific industries. And we have a lot of bills that address workforce. Two that come to mind immediately are Speaker Fectow's bills regarding capital improvements for career technical education, and there is another bill to bolster Maine's future workforce. We also are working on legislation to protect workers. We want good paying, secure jobs, and the House Democrats will work to support fair wages and benefits. We are working on improving, and it's a priority for all of us, I think, improving our infrastructure. We rely on infrastructure every day to conduct our work. And it's a priority of the 130th legislature to keep our roads, bridges, waterfronts maintained so businesses can continue their operations. And of course, we're all focused on broadband. My connection this morning is a little bit unstable, and I live in an area that actually has pretty decent broadband. Never mind, rural communities where, they're working at a 3 meg service. I mean, I think there's no denying that the critical need for broadband. And just this morning, I was thrilled to see in the paper that we will be receiving some federal stimulus money to put towards broadband. I think, we all can support the need for that. Additionally, when I think about the House Democrats' priorities, as Governor Mills talked about, we are committed to supporting our heritage industries. I was lucky enough to be on the Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry Committee my first 2 terms. That is an area of passion for me, and I was thrilled that we have a focus on fishing, on farming, on logging, shipbuilding. Those are things that speak to areas that, part of the fabric of Maine. And we rely very heavily on these industries throughout Maine. So also on the House Democrats' priority list is expanding green energy. Maine is seeing a growth in the green energy sector and the opportunities it presents to our rural communities. And we would like to advance these industries by ensuring they have the support they need and the renewable resources. And one of the things that is of personal interest to me, but also to, I think, all of us in the legislature, is investing in childcare. I think the pandemic brought to light a crisis that existed prior to the pandemic, but it's forcing our attention. As you know, many Maine parents were pushed out of the workforce because of the pandemic, but it seems to have disproportionately hit women. And a lot of this, the challenges parents have faced finding childcare and remote learning have been huge. So, I think also, especially in rural parts of the states, this is not a new problem, and we have had a serious shortage of affordable and accessible childcare options. So I feel like to get our economy back on track with our parents, particularly women, we need to be able to get back to work. We need to improve the childcare sector, and I think my colleagues and I are very committed to working on this in the legislature, and there's a number of bills to do so. So I want to be mindful of the time, and I want to again say thank you for the opportunity to speak with you. And before I wrap up, I would also like to do a shout out and thank all the businesses in Maine that have had a direct role in combating the COVID-19 pandemic and helping us overcome this. I think about like the distilleries that have made hand sanitizer, or the manufacturing companies that turned to making the COVID-19 tests and the PPE, and while also providing people jobs at a time when there were no new jobs. Mm-hmm. So I'm grateful for this. I am very appreciative of the business community. And when this is finally behind us here in Maine, I think it'll be in large part thanks to the business leaders in Maine.
Well, I thank you for that comment, and I certainly appreciate your participation here with us today. You talked about many of the questions. You even touched upon the priorities as I understood it, as it related to the PPP latest provision of nearly $1 billion. I also want to take you back because, and this is more of a question, in no way is it a challenge, but as I think about the 2-part, and correct me if my understanding is wrong, I see it as what we used to refer to as Part 1, Part 2 budget. Part 1 kind of stabilizes, it's the existing expenses, it's the essential service. And you had mentioned that the party wants very much to have that as a 2/3. that allows it to go into its presence, into the advantages brought forward very, very quickly. If it is a majority, then it's 90 days after adjournment, which suggests to me that you would adjourn the session, come back in a special session, and you would have a supplemental budget that would look at new expenditures, new initiatives. And I guess my question is, having lived through previous situations where a majority budget does take place, it leaves, let me put it in its simplest of terms, it leaves a bad taste in the other party's mouth. And yet we're dependent upon, we see this session as an incredible opportunity for investments in some key areas. And you mentioned it. I mean, many of the issues that you mentioned were in the back to work proposal that the governor set forward, from childcare to broadband to transportation to the heritage industries and so forth. Do you see that if that is a bond issue and you need 2/3 and you only get a majority in the first round, doesn't that create an even higher hill to climb in order to get that? And I realize that's conjecture, but having seen this play out before, does that concern you at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think it does, or it can present some challenges, but I think we're all very committed to recovering from this pandemic. Right. And I think there are things, part one and part two budget were the way that the legislature conducted business for years. It's only maybe recently in the last 10 years that we went to the format we have now. But, with the essential services going through in the biennial budget and then having a supplemental, that's an opportunity for us to work together for new items and, negotiate and do what's best for the people of Maine. Mainers helping Mainers. And there are a lot of things that both Democrats, Republicans, Independents, Greens, that we all care about, transportation budget being one of them, or broadband initiative. And we also are going to be the beneficiary of federal stimulus money. And I think that also kind of blunts some of the anxiety of needing 2/3 for things. We will have to work together to determine where the unallocated funds that are coming to us from the federal government go. And I think there's many things we agree on, as we did in the prior supplemental that we just passed.
You mentioned earlier, and the reason I'm taking your time, which I really appreciate, which is a little different than we had set forth, and I appreciate your willingness to have me ask you these questions, because I know you have to leave at 9:30, whereas the rest will be around, at least two of them will be around after 10, and Senator Vitelli has to leave at 10. You referenced the COVID-19 and wanting to get back into session. This is just, I realize this is conjecture, but do you think before the session's over that with the vaccines that there is a chance we'll get back in person? Or do you think it's a foregone conclusion, it's going to be virtual all the way?
Well, I think there's nobody that wants to be back in person at the State House more than me. Yeah. I miss being there. I miss the pride of that building. I miss actually seeing all of you in the hallway and having those conversations about bills and legislation and things that are happening. And I miss this event being in person. So I am optimistic about the vaccine, especially with the acceleration, but I don't see it happening this session. I hope I'm wrong. But I do see our committee work going forward virtually full steam ahead. And I guess I wouldn't absolutely roll it out, but I don't see it for this session.
Fair enough. Well, I know you have to leave. I thank you immensely for your willingness to participate. That does mean a lot to us. And we too look forward to being able to actually shake your hand and to talk with you one-on-one. And those days will come, and not soon enough, perhaps. But we do appreciate what Maine has been able to accomplish during this very challenging times. And I hope that we all look back with appreciation on how that occurred and why it occurred, and the fact that we may complain but we're better off than so many places. So I thank you for being with us. I know you have to leave. Good luck, take care, and we will be in touch for sure, even if it is
Thank
virtual.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you again.
So Representative Stetkis, the opportunity is yours. I will take us back to the very initial program, which was to have you talk about really where we stand with this new process in play now, but also how you see the rest of the session, your priorities for what comes next. So Joel, it's all yours.
Good morning and thank you. I guess I'll reintroduce myself. Seems to be precedent that Representative Dunphy had set. I'm Joel Stetkis. I represent District 105, which are the towns of Canaan, Palmyra, St. Albans, Heartland, Ripley, and Cambridge, rural part of our state. I guess I will start out with agreeing with Representative Dunphy on one particular issue, that this interactive Zoom process that we're in seems to be, wrapped around our entire life, just is not the same as in person by any means. Myself, like many of my constituents and friends that I talk with all the time, I'm more of a hands-on, face-to-face type person. So this type of interaction is actually uncomfortable for me. So makes it a little bit more difficult to to really say what I'd like to, and and unfortunately, what we're finding with and this is throughout all of our different committees, is the amount of testimony, the amount of citizens weighing in on the laws and the rules and the regulations that they're going to have to live under and pay for has dropped substantially. I think those of you in the chamber that watch bills closely, and you're looking at some of the testimonies, overwhelmingly more than usual, it's the special interest groups and the lobbyists and those types of people that are weighing in. And I really feel that this has not been a good process for the people of Maine, not being able to have their voices heard as much as what we normally would. As far as the supplemental budget that just passed, Republicans are very, very pleased that between the pressure that we put on, as well as the public outcry that was a large amount of pressure as well, that we're able to, change the minds of the governor and the Democrats to support PPP. We understand in our area that PPP wasn't necessarily a windfall for a lot of our businesses. It was a crutch, just barely to keep them alive, and then to try to tax them on top of that. Some of the businesses that did barely make it through, it would probably deep six some of them. So that was a very, very important part, especially for rural Maine, where so many of our businesses for years now have been struggling, less and less work and career opportunities for our folks around here. So that was a big deal. That was a big win to help bring them along. And then, of course, we strongly believe in saving for a rainy day, not spending every penny in the checkbook every month. So the added millions of dollars to the rainy day fund was helpful as well to bring, to make a better deal. I can't really say a whole lot about the news on the majority budget, unfortunately, and for over a year now, a lot of the things that Republicans learn about what's going on the Democrat side and from the administration, we're learning at the same time as the rest of you in press releases or on the evening news. which is very frustrating. Certainly not the way to run a Republican form of government. Leaving out the voices of so many Mainers. As Republicans, as you all know, geographically, we represent more than half of the state. And, in the House, we're a handful of votes short of the majority. So to completely leave the minority out of these conversations certainly doesn't bring us together very easy. Outside of that, I would say some of our priorities, and you can see some of it reflected in the small percentage of bills that Republicans have in overall, as compared to the 2,000 or so that we're going to be seeing. I think first and foremost, especially this time of year, what we're hearing from our constituents more than anything is roads and bridges. If you're not hearing complaints about potholes, then you're probably not living in Maine. So we feel that, roads and bridges, and many of us have been pushing for years, moving towards almost a pay-as-you-go, as opposed to every year borrowing money and paying interest on these bonds to sort of get ahead of the curve, so that we can get our infrastructure up to where it ought to be. The other priority would be, as the news reported over the last couple of weeks, is Republicans' efforts to get us back to a checks and balances form of government. There's absolutely no reason, when you look at the science, why the chief executive, the governor, is making so many of these decisions on her own. We're in session, we're having public hearings. These very important decisions that affect so many Mainers should at least have those citizens' voices heard. And again, the more eyes on these issues, the less chance of, falling short on some things, some problems in the future that may be avoided instead of, the way they've been going. One of the things that comes to mind more than anything was the stops and the starts for our restaurant industry, where, so many businesses, they went out and invested what little bit of money they had, because business wasn't very well, obviously, in product. And in a 24 or 48 hour period, the rules changed, and all that product was unable to be used and was very costly. And we've all heard about that.
Yep.
And I would say overall, the other big priority that we've been working for years is moving Maine towards a much more pro-business environment to attract those businesses and jobs, instead of what we find ourselves in the adversarial situation over the last several years. I'll speak for myself personally. I believe that a pro-business environment in the state will bring more business to Maine and create more jobs than either politicians or government bureaucrats ever will. The private sector is where it's at. As a business owner, we know what it's going to take to grow and expand our business and hire more people and pay higher wages. We certainly don't need, more bills and legislation, and especially borrowing. Somebody had brought up and I don't know a whole lot about it, but the bond basically was to borrow, that the Mills administration to borrow money, basically in some of the news reports, to keep from raising taxes. We're going to borrow money. Not exactly where we ought to go. Maybe we ought to work on some better spending priorities.
Well, thank you, Representative. We'll get back to you and others with some specific questions, but we appreciate your response to the basic question that we put forward. So let's go to the Senate. And again, Senator Vitelli has to leave at 10. So Senator, we would like to ask you the very same question. Looking forward to your response.
Well, thank you, Dana. It's good to be here with all of you in our little boxes that we've all gotten quite used to seeing each other framed within. I am Eloise Vitelli. I represent Senate District 23, which is all of Saginaw County and the town of Dresden in Lincoln County. And it is my pleasure to be serving as the majority leader for our Senate Democratic Caucus. A lot of what my colleague, Representative Michele Dunphy, spoke about, I would simply say ditto in terms of both where I think we are and what some of the priorities are. But let me say a little bit more than that. I think Michele did lay it out fairly well. When we came back into session in December of last year, the Senate Democrats got together to look at what our priorities were going to be for this session and to sort of figure out how we were going to proceed. And the number one issue that we felt then and continue to feel is that we need to do all we can to protect the health and safety of Maine people as we continue to work through this pandemic. So obviously LD1 was a top priority to make sure that people could get the vaccines, could get the testing to keep themselves safe and healthy through this pandemic. So we were pleased that we were able to accomplish that. I think the other thing I would say about the budget process, because that was also top of our priority to make sure that we could come up with a budget that took care of the basic needs of Maine people. I was very pleased to be able to work with our colleagues in getting the supplemental budget passed in a broadly bipartisan way. And I think that's our expectation for this next basic budget proposal that's the Appropriations Committee has been working on and continues to work on even as we speak, coming up in the next few days. I think in keeping with the idea of protecting the health and safety of our constituents and the people of Maine, I see this budget that's being proposed as a way of helping to preserve the health and sanity of the people in Maine. We've all been through enough uncertainty, enough anxiety, enough roller coaster throughout this pandemic that it seems to me that by passing in a bipartisan way a budget that sets a basic level of functioning for our government so that our families, our communities, our businesses have some certainty going forward is something that we can all agree on is important to do for all of the people in the state of Maine. Michele talked about the school budgets that are in process. They need to know what they're dealing with. Our families need to know that the help is out there for them. Our businesses need to know. The same way when we passed the supplemental budget, we were able to provide some certainty around the tax situation regarding PPP. I think this next budget will sort of lay the groundwork so that people have some greater certainty as we continue to work our way through this pandemic and get back to a new normal for all of our families, communities, and for our businesses. So I think it's exciting what is coming before us, and I'm very hopeful that we'll be able to pass a bipartisan budget. And then I think it's going to be important to take the time to look at what is coming to the state through the latest federal program, the ARP. There's still a lot of questions about how that money is going to be allocated. There's some questions because of Maine's form of county government, for instance, how the counties are going to manage the funds that are directed in their direction. There's going to be help for our municipalities. So I think there's a lot that we can look at there as we look at what our other priorities are. So back to that, in addition to protecting the health and safety of Maine people, to establishing a budget that is fair and gets the job done, I think the other priorities that we've been looking at, certainly broadband, as we've all struggled to continue to connect with each other online. I happen to live, I'm fortunate today, my broadband seems to be pretty strong. I usually get messages that say unstable. So that's an issue I think that we've all come to some agreement on, that we need to make sure that this infrastructure, this basic infrastructure, gets laid out for all of us to be able to connect. And so again, there's some opportunities coming from the federal funding. There are bond proposals, both from the governor and others, to look at how we do this. I think it's going to be important to talk about how as we can structure a public-private partnership to accomplish getting broadband access to all of our residents in this state. Michele talked about, and others have talked about, getting our workforce back, getting people back to work. And I couldn't agree more with what was said about the need for better childcare. You know, we can't have people in the workforce if their kids aren't well cared for. So I hear a lot from my constituents about schools, about childcare, about their need for getting back to work, and also recognize that, you know, the jobs, some of the jobs aren't going to be there anymore, or that there are going to be different jobs out there. So we, you know, these are issues that we've had even before the pandemic, but they've come to the fore as a result of the pandemic and the shifts that that's caused. So I certainly support activities and proposals that will both help our schools get back to full functioning. I was pleased when the vaccine rollout gave priority to our educators, and then other proposals to make sure that our childcare providers are well compensated, well paid, and well supported in doing the really essential work of taking care of our next generation, frankly, and doing it so that others can do their job. So those are among some of the priorities that I see. I also am spending a fair amount of my time on the Energy, Utility, and Technology Committee. Another broad priority for our caucus is clean energy and addressing issues around climate change. So a lot of those issues are being addressed in the EUT committee. I think there's some challenging issues there. It's complicated. I'm not an engineer, so I'm, you know, trying to look for some of the best ways forward. I think there are a lot of good proposals out there that will make sure that Maine can move towards our clean climate goals in a way that's fair, equitable, and that reaches the entire state. But the answers aren't easy to come by, and it's going to take all of us working together. And I guess that's the one thing I would end on is, and again, this echoes, I think, what others have said, which is the incredible role that our small businesses and our communities have played in helping all of us get through this incredibly challenging time. I've been very impressed with the innovation, with the creativity, with the determination that I've seen among our small businesses in my communities, and I'm sure it's replicated around the state, to just come up with new solutions, to sort of push through so that they could keep their businesses going, so that they could continue to serve their community. It's been remarkable, truly, to see how people have come together and found ways to continue to support each other, to keep things going, and to adapt to these changing circumstances that we're all struggling to understand. That said, I would also agree that this format, while it keeps things going, is not ideal. And I too would welcome the opportunity to be back at work in person. The 2 days that we were at the Civic Center recently were just delightful to be able to see my colleagues in person, to be able to chat briefly as we passed in the hallways. That kind of human interaction is something I think all of us crave. I'm feeling more hopeful that we will get there. I'm fortunate I was one of the early ones to be vaccinated. And I would encourage others to take advantage of that opportunity as it comes to you. It does provide me, at least, with a certain sense of calm, if you will, to have gotten that vaccine, and gives me some hope that we, in fact, will find ourselves back together in person. I don't know if it's going to happen this session, Dana, to answer that question. I think it does hold out some possibility that we could get there, but I am looking forward to at least being back at the Civic Center so I can see my colleague, Senator Pouliot, and others in person again to get our business done. That said, I am also very proud of how each one of us in the legislature, our staff and the nonpartisan staff in particular, have also adapted and learned and made the current system work, because I think it has. And I would agree that, you know, it has opened up more channels for people to have input into this legislative process. So there may be some things that we are in fact going to hold over even as we get back to meeting in person from this experience of having to do things remotely. So I'm hopeful that better days are coming. I think we've got some good possibilities ahead of us with this basic budget. And then I look forward to looking more closely at what's coming our way from the federal relief funds to see what more we can do to make sure that Maine families, communities, and businesses can get back on their feet and build towards a better future. So thank you for having me here today.
Well, we thank you as well. And we know you have to leave at 10, but if you can hang around with us for another 10, 12 minutes while I ask Republican Matt Pouliot to give us his reaction to that very first question of standing as well as priority. Senator?
Yeah, thank you, Dana, for having me today. And to all those who have already given an update, I kind of feel like Zsa Zsa Gabor's eighth husband. I know what to do, but not how to make it interesting. So we'll see if I can add anything here, but I actually will probably just be brief so that if folks have questions, we can answer those before Senator Vitelli has to go. I will say that I was a bit discouraged to learn through the press yesterday that it is the plan of majority Democrats in the legislature to pass a budget. That to me is extremely concerning. While there is precedent for that, I think it flies in the face of what we've been touting of a need for us to work together. The reality is, I guess we could just go in and vote for that proposal. And if we don't, I suppose some will chastise us for not doing so in the name of not being bipartisan. But the reality is that the minority really hasn't had much to say in any of the dealings in the state legislature so far to date, with the exception of our push to get full conformity on the PPP funds, which I was glad to see finally happened. We were very clear from the beginning that we needed to have full conformity, and I'm glad that we got most of the way there. There's a couple of things, if you were to dig into the weeds, it's not 100% full conformity, but I think we got the lion's share of what we were asking for and what the chamber was certainly supportive of. So while I'm concerned that this is the approach that's being taken, I guess I can't say that I'm surprised. Since March of 2020, when we first granted, powers to the governor to have a state of emergency, we were told at that time that it would just be a 30-day period and that the legislature could come back and end by resolution that state of emergency. The reality is that though we've had many opportunities to do that, and even specific resolutions have been proposed, those have not been supported by the majority of my colleagues in the legislature. And I think it's important for folks to know that on Monday, there's a number of bills that are going to be coming before the legislature that discuss this state of emergency. Some of them are as black and white as ending it, and others, like a bill that I'm proposing, would require a 2/3 majority for these situations to be extended. And some folks would say, well, we already have the right to have a joint resolution right now. What's the need for a 2/3 vote in the legislature to extend a state of emergency? But the reality is that we don't really have a balance of power in Augusta right now. The chief executive is a Democrat, and the majorities of both the House and Senate are Democrats. And so if they don't feel compelled to pass a resolution, there's no requirement for the majority of the legislature, at least a 2/3 majority, to have a say in any of that. And so it really does take away the ability for the minority party to have a role in governing, which I think, if we look back on the times that we do our best work, it's when we have to find ways to come to consensus. And right now, the reality in Augusta is that is not a requirement. And so we are waiting for our Democratic colleagues to give us an opportunity to do that. But unfortunately, that hasn't happened. And so what I'm suggesting is that if we had a 2/3 requirement to extend a state of emergency, we could hopefully get back a little bit more of a balance of power, what I think our system was designed to address. But your questions really were about our system of governing right now. Virtually, I think you've heard the sentiments. We'd all prefer to be there in person. Some of us have actually made, attempts to do that and have requested real attempts for us to get back into the legislature. And others have just said that they would prefer to be in person, but are actually in a position to change that and have done nothing. So I do think, there's 34 states right now that are meeting in person in some form or fashion. And then others are meeting in a hybrid setup, similar to what Maine's doing. So, the reality is that other states have found ways to do this safely. And if our students can go back to school full time, I don't understand why 186 adults can't go back to work full time in person. It's the way that we legislate best. I mean, seeing people in the halls, how many, lobbyists are on this call today who've had to arrange Zoom meetings with a legislator that could otherwise be done in 15 to 20 seconds in the halls of the State House, or other members of the legislature trying to get input on a bill so that maybe they can make amendments to get something passed. I mean, our system of government just was not set up for us to do business this way. And I think it's critical that we get back to the State House. Those who are qualified for should be getting vaccinations. We can all wear masks, we can social distance and wash our hands. We were at the Civic Center 2 weeks ago, and I saw many legislators standing around each other. The same legislators that say it's not safe to go back were mingling in groups of 6 to 8 people in close proximity. It just seems hypocritical to me. And I think that it's, in my opinion, it's a bit of a power grab to kind of quell the process and further control the narrative. So I just think that, it's important that we get back there and be a part of actual bipartisan legislating and not just, make nods to it and then not do it. Our top priority, I think, this session really is to make sure that we have no tax increases and that the burdens on Maine small businesses are reduced as much as possible. You're the job creators. You're making sure that people have the resources to provide for their families. And the reality is that this past year has been extremely challenging, and we need to do what we can to reduce those burdens. There's a question that you had about broadband support. I want to be very clear that I think all members of the legislature, particularly the Maine Senate Republican caucus, are extremely supportive of initiatives to expand access to high-speed internet. I don't think that means just cable alone or fiber. I think that we can and should be looking at investments in low-level satellite operations that can deliver these, internet connections as reliably and for a lot less expense than running cables, all over a very rurally dispersed state. So I'm hopeful that we can come together and utilize the $100 million that the federal government has just granted to the state to do these expansions of broadband without having to bond. It's really alluring, I think, to bond right now because the interest rates are so low. However, these are future debt payments that we have to make, which take money out of the general fund that could be used to support other programs, like expanding high quality access to early childhood education, which I think is vital in terms of our workforce development in the 21st century. Increasing our contributions to our infrastructure. This time of year, we're all going to the repair shops to fix our cars because the roads are in such abysmal shape. And some folks have asked, how would we pay for this, especially with electric vehicles, becoming more and more prevalent. I think it's going to require some reliance on the general fund to do that. But if we're paying debt payments down the road for money that we borrowed now for Band-Aids, we're not going to have as much of an ability to do that. So there's probably a lot more things that I could say. That's a general sentiment of where we're at right now. I would be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Well, I thank you, Senator. And with that, before we jump into questions, why don't we take a short break? Don't go away, but I want to give the opportunity to two of our break sponsors who have provided for us a pre-recorded message. So Angie, if you would.
Preddy prides itself on guiding our clients through the intersection of business and government to help them achieve their business goals.
Preddy Flaherty's Government Affairs Group has decades-long relationships in and around the State House with legislators, staff, and the executive branch.
Most of us in Preddy have been working with the legislature in some fashion or other for 20 years, 40 years, 50 years in some cases.
I think one of the things that makes Preddy really effective is the diversity of the client base that we have and all of the different areas of industries that we represent.
We have a wide net when it comes to personalities, experiences, and really be able to effectively apply those experiences to the legislative process.
Please reach out if we can be of assistance.
Are you ready for the next step in your career path? Jumpstart your calling with an online master's degree from Thomas College. Earn your MBA through career-focused curriculum that will set you apart in the workplace. Explore data security and protection through cybersecurity. Dig deep into the roots of criminology to understand criminal justice. Learn about flexible 8-week modules. Study anywhere and any hour with online courses. Advance your career with a graduate degree from Thomas College. Find out more at thomas.edu/GPS.
Well, welcome back. And now with the time left for us, we have our two Republican representatives from each of the bodies, the House and the Senate. And the floor is yours. But let me start. The number of questions that we had put forward, whether it was in-person priority for, I might ask you in that respect again, if there is a 2/3 budget and it doesn't come out of the $1 billion as has been not expressed in terms of certainty, but left open in terms of a possibility, what would be your top priority for that $1 billion that you believe would do the most to help meet the needs of Maine's small business community or grow our economy? What would that be? Representative Stetkis? I think you're still on mute. There you go.
It's so early yet. It's tough to say. We don't know what the strings are that are going to be attached to this money. I would say right off the top of my head, if there were no strings, to actually put into almost an account of some sort, more monies for future infrastructure improvements. Roads and bridges obviously is what I'm hearing more than anything, especially in rural Maine. Bridges, I've got small businesses, construction businesses that because our bridges are falling apart and the state has to downgrade the weight limits on them, that they're now traveling 2, 3, 4, 5 times the distance to get to a job, which of course, as you all know, increases costs and is actually even more wear and tear on even more roads. So, to get to that point where we can actually have money set aside for when there is actually workforce enough. I know that was one thing that we ran into a couple of years ago was we had the money to do the repairs, but because of cost of materials and the shortage of workforce, we couldn't actually get the work done in the short season that we do. So for me, I think overall that would be a good place to start. The broadband thing, obviously, in rural Maine is huge. Looks like we're hitting that thing from several different fronts, whether it's the corridor coming down from Quebec. I mean, that's going to have fiber run through some of the most rural parts of our state here in my county. And of course, they added a new fee to cell phones a couple of years ago. We've got, a couple $1 million coming in for that. So that type of infrastructure, I think, is really where we need to prepare for the future.
Senator?
I'm still on mute, not on mute. We're going to have to start new classes in the K-12 system about how to use Zoom.
Yeah.
So I really think that it's important that we make decisions not based on conjecture or anecdotes. And the reality is that the state does have a 10-year plan that was put forward, in late 2019. And the 3 tenets of that plan were to grow our annual wages by 10%, to increase the value of the products sold by each worker by 10%, and to attract 75,000 people to Maine's talent pool. As a realtor, I can tell you firsthand, we're doing a good job on number 3. There's a lot of people moving here. However, the data is still out on whether those folks are in the workforce or not. And I think that one of the ways that we are going to be able to attract more people to Maine to help achieve that goal of 75,000 is to expand our connectivity, which we've talked about ad nauseum. So I do think that, if there were an opportunity for us to focus some resources, it really needs to be on that particular initiative. But we can't stop there. Many of you are employers, and I've never had one of you, despite Republicans really focus on tax changes and reductions when possible and so forth, which I'm clearly a supporter of. I've never had one of you come to me and say, first and foremost, we need to reduce Maine's taxes. It's always been, I can't find people to hire. I think Kathy DeMerchant's on this call. I mean, her job is to find people for employers every day, and it's a struggle. And frankly, we need to do more to help educate our future workers and those who are looking to change professions for the jobs that are available in the 21st century. That's why I've been a huge proponent of career and technical education and trade education, because we need to make sure that, students who aren't, on a path to some kind of a, baccalaureate degree or as it would be called maybe a white collar type job, who are more interested in working with their hands or in the trades, that they're supported, that they don't feel like doing so is somehow less than, and that we provide the resources to help them make it through that educational journey so that they can participate, actively in the labor force. This past year has been a real challenge for a lot of employers because people have been incentivized to stay at home. when you're receiving more money and unemployment than you'd get working, you know, at the local corner store, it's hard for that corner store to get somebody to show up and do the job. So we need to provide incentives for people to get back into the workforce. Maybe that means, you know, giving people the resources to change, you know, their career field by going back to school and helping them through that. Things of that nature, I think, are vital. So there's probably a lot more that I could say, but I think that, you know, the workforce development is key to us, you know, getting and the connectivity to us getting these 75,000 people here and then increasing, you know, our value per worker.
Yeah, and you bring up, I believe, to be a very valid point. And I'll try not to say this in a way that I'm lobbying, but in fact, it's hard not to say it and not be lobbying. And that is, for the first time, I came to the state government as Commissioner of Transportation in '84. And this is the first time that I've actually been witness to having a strategic plan that really you can really see and buy into it. You know, you're in addition to what you said, the cornerstones to get there, or the foundational features, are the workforce, both in terms of skill and supply, retention, all of those issues, which really recognizes, in my opinion, that it is about your community college. It is about your career technical centers. It is about higher ed, the University of Maine system. Each have a role. It's not a situation where they're competing. They're working together and they need the funding to be able to deliver on the product. Not to mention how businesses themselves have stepped up into that arena to do some of their own training, which is legitimate. But you also have what all companies who have been here for a length of time understands, and that's innovation and research and development, how fundamental that is. But also those key investments, you both have recognized it, is that it's the broadband, it's the childcare, it's the transportation. And when you look at that, you know, I would hope, this is the part I'm lobbying, I can't deny it. I would hope that because it is in place, it seems to speak to where most of us are at. And as we get that $1 billion grant from the federal government, it would be a recommendation that we look through the lens of what those priorities are that have come out of the strategic plan, economic recovery committee that's been built upon that, as well as the measures of growth. It's the first time I've seen the three efforts all kind of coalescing around one another. And I think that's an extremely positive statement. I'd be interested in your reaction. It's not, I don't expect a definitive answer, but wouldn't it be nice if because there's so much harmony in those three efforts and the priorities they set forward, that when we get the $1 billion, we use that as the lens or the guiding principles to evaluate both legislation, but also the $1 billion that we get from the state. A long question, not sure there's a specific answer, but I'd love your reaction.
Well, yeah, I mean, the reality is that it would be nice, but right now, the current posture of the way things are being governed in Augusta, as I laid out, I'm not getting a call from President Jackson that says, hey, Matt, would you come to my office with Senator Timberlake, Senator Vitelli, and Senator Daughtry and have a conversation about how Maine's budget is going to align with our state's economic recovery plan? It's like, you know, that's not happening. So I just, you know, I do think that, you know, we have and should utilize a plan to move our state forward and use it as that lens, as you say, Dana, to make some of these decisions. But it's like, that's over here and the reality is we're here just kind of moving stuff forward. So it is discouraging as a former member of the Measures of Growth Council, you know, to see time and time again information put out to the legislature about the right levers to pull to move our state forward. And then it gets just caught up in this whole biennial budget discussion that seems to me to be a race to the bottom in many respects about where can we find the deal to get this things passed, not working, you know, from a higher level of how we're achieving these objectives. And maybe that'll change. Maybe Democrats next week will choose to pass a majority budget and then have some kind of, aha moment and come back afterwards to figure out a way to incorporate these pieces. I don't know. I always remain optimistic, but so far it hasn't played out that way.
Yeah. Representatives?
I think that's a great point with the, with the plans that are in place. Many of you have been in the committee rooms and have personally seen my frustration and have probably heard this a few too many times. But as a legislature, I found for the 6 going on 7 years that I've been there is we spend more time shooting ourselves in the foot with all these other hundreds of pieces of legislation that actually move us in the wrong direction. And then we decide, okay, we're going to pay attention to, say it's an item from the recovery plan. We're going to do this one piece over here, while at the same time, with these other pieces of legislation, we're moving in the wrong direction. One of the things that I've been seeing a lot of in the last session or two is addressing professional licensing. For years, many of us have been saying, especially someone like myself, I've held 3 different state licenses, actually I think 4 now, is how these Maine's licensing system actually deters people from getting into the workforce and deters people from coming to the state and getting right to work. Now we're starting to see from both sides of the aisle, some of these reforms coming, while at the exact same time, almost in the same week, you're seeing proposals to increase licensing on these professions, while at the same time, some of the same people are admitting that, licensing is hurting our economy and our workforce in this other profession. So I think, if we looked a lot closer at these plans, and whenever we propose legislation, we took them into account, I think it could make a big difference.
Yeah, I'm reflecting on a question in the chat room, but it's also one that I struggle with, and that is, we all recognize that energy costs are a big issue in terms of business and our economy today. We do okay in the New England region, but outside that, when we compete in a global economy, we're not in strong standing. And yet we find that it doesn't seem to matter what the source it is that it happens to be, whether it's transmission line, whether it's natural gas, whether it's wind, whether it's offshore wind. There seems to be, not unexpectedly, because I lived either as a city manager or commissioner and now in this position, that you recognize there's going to be opposition. You recognize that there is a process that's in place to try to deal with those issues and minimize the harm. But how do we get ourselves out of this high cost without recognizing that there is a role for the transmission, whether it's based on energy cost or environmental greenhouse gas emissions, whether the offshore wind has a place? Yes, you have to mitigate those issues that cause problems, in the same way that natural gas has recently been rejected in a community that affected a region. Those are all issues for which there is a process. But at the end of the day, how do we overcome and how do we get together to create, as we've seen in other instances, a plan forward that allows us to address an issue, energy cost, that's on the table and that we all want to address?
Well, Dana, one thing that I would like to see is, how in the legislature, when we have emergency legislation, it's supposed to be deemed emergency to move forward. One structural change that we could make is an analysis about how this would impact the state's economic plan. Like, how does this legislation move us forward? And if it doesn't, maybe we consider not hearing that. Representative Stetkis made a really valid point, which is there are so many bills before the legislature that really have no impact in terms of moving our state forward and in growing our economy. And at least I think there's ways that creative legislators could fit a lot of things into that lens, but at least it would have them thinking through that lens, as opposed to just I'm putting this legislation forward and see where it goes. So I would like to see that. Maybe that's perhaps a structural change the legislature could do. But, as it relates to energy costs, the reality is that though I'm in my 9th year of legislative service, I've not really ever seen a proposal that seemed to be the silver bullet. There's a lot of silver buckshot going around, but we have to figure out ways to reduce the costs of transmission and distribution, but also we have to be open to investing in new kinds of technology. But there's always kind of an adversarial relationship there. If everybody in Maine could afford to have, an array of solar panels or a wind turbine in their backyard, kind of the modern day equivalent of 40 yards of wood out back to burn for yourself, and could put one of Elon Musk's batteries in their house, maybe these things would be more viable, but those technologies are still a long ways out and they're very expensive. I do think that storage is going to be our pathway toward helping reduce costs in the long run. There's a tremendous amount of power that's created in Canada with a renewable resource called hydro. And oh, by the way, it's the oldest form of battery technology there ever was. You know what I mean? You can store it up until you need it, and then you just open it up. So I do think that we have to be mindful of utilizing those resources. I am, as somebody that believes in strong national security, a little bit concerned about handing over that to the federal government. To another nation, rather, to be beholden to them for our energy. So we do have to find ways to balance that out within our own borders. There's a discussion going on right now about what should be happening with, maybe the rest of Maine's dams. And, if we are concerned about energy costs, we need to keep a close eye on that, because while they certainly don't provide all of our needs, they do help.
Representative, you want to add to that?
Well, I will. I guess I will in short. Yeah, energy costs has always been at one of the tops of the priority chain for me. And like when in some of the committee meetings, and especially with like Yellow Light Green, he and I have had many conversations back and forth on this, and I'm not sure exactly how you do it. Maybe we go back to touch on a little bit of what Senator Pouliot said about when a particular piece of legislation rises to the level, it's red flagged. It's legislators are alerted that, hey, this piece of legislation actually moves us in the wrong direction as compared to the economic recovery plan or MDF's plan or those things. But the key is going to be is somehow, some way, remove as much ideology and politics from the conversation as possible, and actually look at the data, look at the mathematics. 2 + 2 is 4, and in so many cases, I think some are trying to make it out to be 5. And as a contractor, trying to fit a square peg into a round hole just doesn't work. One of the things that we're seeing in our area is these solar farms are being built all over the place. But what they're doing is they're being built on our farmland. So on one hand, we're saying we need more locally produced food because that's an issue. But now we're covering the places that produce food with solar panels that increase our electrical costs. So we're increasing our food costs and we're increasing our electrical costs by putting up solar panels. So if we actually looked at the data and judged the legislation by that, I think we could make some better decisions.
Well, I've kind of dominated the questions. I don't see any others in the chat room. We've only got a few minutes left. I will say to both of you, I know that your Democratic colleagues had commitments that they had to meet. I regret that they weren't available to hear the last 2 questions, which were more spontaneous in nature, but I'm sure that opportunity exists. But I certainly want to thank the 2 of you. You've hung in there and you've answered questions. I will, seeing no further questions in the chat room, and if I'm missing someone, Peter, you can speak up. But I do want to say that, you know, the only advantage perhaps of being around as long as I have is that you see things that are important and that have a sense of priority. And we always feel the best when the resolutions are bipartisan nature, when there is the opportunity for both sides to be heard. I would hope that in this session, just as a supplemental budget came together ultimately in a very strong bipartisan way, both sides were heard, both sides participated. I was there to witness it, so I can speak to that. And we would hope that the words that we heard earlier, that there truly is an effort to reach 2/3, both at this part one, as I describe it, but also the part two, which is additional spending, as well as new initiatives, most notably how that $1 billion gets spent. I do hope that the words that you heard do come to pass, that there is a place for everybody to be heard, and that there would be that bipartisan expression. I think everybody essentially from the business community would like to see it, because those of us who have lived with majority decisions when it comes to those matters, whether it's bonds or whether it's budget, always feel the after effect of it, and it takes a while for that healing. I'm not overreacting. I do believe that is the case. So,
Dana, one thing I just wanted to say is that, you know, in the legislature, I think the identity, you know, of Republicans is standing up for Maine small businesses. One of the challenges that we have is that when it comes right down to the wire, sometimes we're not actually hearing from those small businesses themselves. And I, as a small business owner myself, I understand why that might be. You know, like Nike once said, both Republicans and Democrats buy shoes. I get it. But when we're in the thick of it, we really need some help from the business community, like standing up for themselves with us too. I mean, we're there to fight the fight, but having that, you know, you take the time to call your legislator locally or write them an email personally or whatever the case might be, it really helps. And I think we did see that demonstrated very well on the PPP issue. I think there was a certain element of populism there for people that weren't even business owners that were like, what the hell? Why would, you know, they be taxing this money that was sent for relief? But that, along with support from the business community, really made a difference. We're going to need that moving ahead. And I appreciate all the work that you always do to help make sure that that voice is heard. But sometimes it's coming just from the chamber, which is great and helpful. But having it come from those individual, you know, owners and so forth makes it more personal for the legislators.
Yeah, I hear that, and I take that as being very constructive. And we work very closely with local and regional chambers because we do recognize that the strength of the family is far greater than any one of us. And I think we all recognize the value of the individual in a community, be it a business or an individual person, reaching out to the legislature is a powerful voice that does need to be heard. Don't disagree with that for a moment. And I think that's a call to us to try to do it even better than we do today. I thank you for that. I thank the both of you for being with us today. And I thank everyone who has tuned in to be a part of our Strictly Social Coffee Hour. And Angie, I would appreciate it if you would put back up our sponsors to give them a final thank you. Our premier sponsors, AT&T, break sponsors, Pretty Flaherty and Thomas College, but we also have a lot of presenting, our official sponsors, our series sponsors, and our presenting sponsors. To all of you, we can't thank you enough for all that you do for us. We appreciate it. Thank you and good day, everyone.